Welcome to the Strategic Communication Mentored Online course. My name is Kristen Mays and I am Strategic Communication Manager for the Reef Resilience Network and your coordinator for this course, along with my colleague Sherry Wagner. We're thrilled by your interest in this topic and totally overwhelmed by the response to this course. So thanks for registering and for taking the time to fill out the online survey. I'll be your host for this kickoff webinar, which is brought to you through the support of NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program. For those of you who are less familiar with the Reef Resilience Network, we are a partnership effort spearheaded by the Nature Conservancy to support marine resource managers around the world by connecting them, well, you, with resources, experts, peers, and skill building opportunities. During the course, you'll be working from the communication module on reefresilience.org, which is one of the key topics featured under Science and Strategies, shown there by that orange circle on the screen. You will also be working with the Network Forum, our online discussion platform where managers can connect with other managers and experts and share resources and lessons learned. We'll be working together in our own private discussion group, Strategic Communication Online Course 2018. There's a photo of it there for you. And I'll talk more about this online discussion forum later. While you're on our website, I encourage you to explore other resources and learning opportunities. Our website is updated by global experts and features information on other key topics such as coral reefs, restoration, reef fisheries, and community-based climate adaptation. The website also features easily searchable summaries of journal articles on resilient science, case studies highlighting successful management strategies and the application of new science, and recordings of previous webinars. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's webinar will be 45 minutes. We'll start off by reviewing the course schedule, information on how to work with a partner during the course, and an overview of course participants. Then we'll jump right into content, beginning with an introduction to strategic communication and the planning process, followed by an introduction to the first 3 planning steps: establishing your goal and objectives, assessing the context for your efforts, and identifying your target audience. Next, we'll talk about how you'll be using the communication module along with our online discussion group on the Network Forum, and we'll wrap up with a question and answer session. There are 2 ways you can ask questions during the webinar Q&A session. You can use the question box anytime throughout the webinar to send questions, and we'll keep track of these for the end of the presentation. Or you can raise your hand during the question session of the webinar, and we'll take your question during that time. Raise your hand by clicking that small little hand icon on the toolbar just to the left of your name. And if you're having any technical difficulties, such as trouble hearing or maybe seeing the slides, you can send us a message via that same question box, and we'll try to resolve the issue as best we can. Key dates for the course, and don't worry, we'll be sending you an email with next steps after the webinar to remind you, and we'll also be posting next steps in our discussion group on the Network Forum, but just wanted to touch on a few key dates or key milestones for the course. Good news is you've made it to the first webinar, so you can cross that off your list. Partner assignments have also been posted in our discussion group. If you haven't signed up for the discussion group, then you haven't been assigned a partner. If you would still like a partner, send an email to resilience@tnc.org. We'll assign partners until January 17th. So go ahead and send that email if you're still interested. January 17th through the 24th, so following this webinar, you'll have 1 week to complete 4 self-paced lessons, which include quizzes, and complete 3 worksheets on the first 3 steps in the communication planning process. Once you complete the first worksheet on establishing your goal and objectives, share your goal and 1 objective with your partner for feedback, and we'll come back to this at the end and talk more about that. Our second webinar will take place January 25th. During this webinar, we'll tackle the rest of the planning process, which includes messaging, tactics, measures, and how to create a summary of your plan. After that webinar, you'll have about 1.5 weeks to complete 4 self-paced lessons and worksheets on these 4 next steps of the communication planning process. Our third and final webinar on February 8th will be used to review concepts discuss any topics or issues based on your needs, and conclude our course. More than 200 people from 54 countries and territories are currently registered for the course. This map shows where participants are joining us from. It's a very impressive global spread. Here also is a snapshot of how you collectively rated your knowledge of communication planning related topics. So thanks again to everyone for filling out the online survey. It's really helpful information for us when planning the course. As a reminder, when asked to rate your knowledge, 1 was none, 5 was a lot. On average, your collective knowledge on all the topics fell between 2 and 3, so a little on average, with knowledge of the planning process being lowest. So hopefully at the end of this online course, your understanding of the process and all the key stages will be greatly improved. Now that we all have a sense of what to expect during the course and who's taking the course, let's jump into our introduction to strategic communication. So for me, when I think about strategic communication, it's really all about how we can make our communication smart. And for many of us, this means retraining ourselves and moving away from the idea that outreach is a meeting or a poster at the tail end of a project to communication that is integrated into projects upfront, communication that is smart and deliberate, and communication that is informed by research. One of the main reasons it's important to be smarter with our communication is information overload. People are increasingly bombarded with information, too much information to be able to absorb and process. So much of it is simply just lost. Recent studies in the US, for example, show that an average American is inundated with as many as 30,000 messages a day, and a whopping 5,000 of those are ads. Another big challenge to our work is that it's difficult to influence people's behaviors. Getting people to change is really difficult. Traditional outreach programs often focus on providing knowledge or information to the public in the hope that it'll lead to behavior change. But 30 years of research have shown that information alone is not enough to spur behavior change. That's why we need strategic communication, the purposeful use of communication to achieve a specific goal. It's about getting the right message to the right person or audience at the right time through the right tactic to achieve a goal. It helps us be thoughtful and deliberate in how we communicate so our messages stand out rather than become part of this information clutter. And helps us hone in on our goal, which in many cases is about motivating people to act. Strategic communication can be used to build support for a specific action or policy, raise awareness, change public policy, influence behavior, as we already mentioned, impact public opinion, and strengthen relationships. It helps you achieve clarity on where you want to go, so your goal, and focus and control on how you get there. Helps you manage time and prioritize limited resources. And then, of course, helps you make your communication reach and impact more effective. Here's a taste of what the strategic communication planning process can look like. You begin, like many planning processes, by establishing your goal, what is it you're trying to achieve, and your objectives or your steps to get there. Next, you assess your resources and assets, clarify what conversations are happening about your topic, and identify places where you can leverage opportunities and mitigate challenges. Next, you identify your target audience. Who is it you need to reach, convince, motivate to act in order to achieve your goal? Once you know who that person or group is, you learn about them and you craft messages that speak directly to them, messages that resonate with your audience. Then you decide what tactics or communication channels work best to connect your audience with your message and motivate them to act. For each tactic, you should develop a way to measure it so you'll know if it's working. You also need to develop project measures so you'll know if you're making progress towards your goal. Once you've done all that planning, then you can get started and implement your project or campaign. Our communication planning module on reefresilience.org is based on this planning process. So as a reminder, you navigate to science and strategies, key topics, then communication. Within this module, you'll find information on how and when to use social marketing, guidance on how to facilitate meetings, talking points to help communicate effectively about key topics related to our work as marine managers, and then of course the communication planning process. And just wanted to make you aware of these other resources that are available. So in this section, we really work to demystify strategic communication and simplify the planning process so that you can work on your own project as you learn. You can see by the table or the menu on the left, each step of the planning process has its own section with streamlined content, quizzes, worksheets, and links to additional resources. So we have the quizzes there to help reinforce key points, worksheets with very detailed instructions and guidance to help walk you through it and apply what you learned to your own project, and then resources if you want to dive a little bit deeper and learn more. Today we're going to touch on, as I mentioned, those first 3 steps, so goal and objectives, context, and audience. The information that I'll be sharing is taken straight from our web pages, so you don't even need to take notes. You can reference most of my talking points on our web pages. And a recording of this webinar will also be emailed to you shortly after and posted in our discussion group. The first step in the planning process is to establish a strong, clear goal that defines your vision so you know where you want to go. Then you define the objectives, the steps for how you're going to get there. Identifying a clear goal and specific objectives is really the most important part of a good strategy and will be used to guide the rest of your efforts. So I'm a little redundant on this, but can't stress that enough. To help articulate your goal, think big picture. Here's where you think about why you're doing what you're doing. One question that really helps me when I'm trying to think about my goal is, what will it look like when I succeed? You need to consider what it is you want to achieve and what it is you really want people to do. Many of our conservation goals are long-term and can take 5, 10, 20 years or maybe more to reach. For an effective and relevant communication strategy, think shorter term. Focus on a goal that can be achieved in 3 to 5 years. So for example, let's say we're in Hawaii, since I am, and our goal is to stop the spread of marine invasive species in Hawaii. This seems like a good big picture goal, but can we make it even more useful by making it more specific? A specific goal gives direction to the planning process and narrows the focus of your project in measurable ways, such as by geography, audience, and timeline. In short, make sure your goals pass the SMART test and are specific, measurable, achievable, or attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So if we were to make our goal smarter, it could look something like this. And this is just a made-up example here, but reduce incidence of marine invasive species in Hawaii's nearshore waters by 80% by 2025. So this hypothetical goal is now measurable thanks to that 80%. It's time-bound by that target of year 2025. And now it's more specific because of that descriptor of nearshore waters. So it doesn't take much to be able to make your goal smarter. And so that's your task. But even with a smarter goal, it's still a big goal. And big goals can be daunting and difficult to develop strategies for. So the next step is to divide your goal into bite-sized objectives. And by bite-sized, I really just mean smaller and more manageable. For objectives, you should think even shorter term. So what can you achieve in the next 12 to 18 months? These can be created or organized based on different audiences you're trying to reach, actions you're trying to make happen, or stages in the planning process. So there's a lot of flexibility there. A successful strategic communication effort will focus on a specific action or actions that can help achieve your goal. And that typically means one objective. which is what we're going to do for our planning process for this course. We'll focus on just one objective for your whole strategy. So let's go back to our Hawaii marine invasive species example. In this scenario, there are many steps we could take to stop the spread of marine invasive species, such as reduce their spread through fishing gear and boats, stop aquarium dumping or boat hull cleaning in water, or get state legislature to pass invasive species policy by 2020 to create more funding for invasive species border control. A little bit of a mouthful, but it's a smart objective, so it probably will be. And the important point here is that our objectives should really say exactly what needs to happen, by whom, where, and when. So when you're deciding on what objective to focus on for your strategy, for this strategy, really it's important to prioritize and ask yourself, consider if any are time dependent. Do any of them have to happen first, or are they sequential? And then think about what objective has the most impact on key decision makers. So now you know where you're going and the steps you need to take to get there. But before you take any steps, as we said earlier, you need to pause and assess your surroundings. So the next step is to assess the context for your efforts. And as this image reminds us, it's important to be aware of your surroundings, which is true when you're in the water and when you're developing a communication strategy. To assess the context for your communication efforts, take a look within your organization, agency, community group, and then beyond it. What do these internal and external landscapes look like, and how will they affect your efforts? Your job is to identify potential opportunities and potential roadblocks. And so we do that by first conducting an internal scan to assess assets and challenges from a capacity perspective for your organization, like I said, organization, agency, or community group, and then key partners. So when you're doing that, you want to consider what resources your group has to work with. For example, staff, budgets. Maybe it's something as simple but important as a high quality printer. To me, that's a huge one with working with partners, as I get to offer that. What are you, your team partners, good or maybe not so good at? So this is looking at skills. Do you or your coworkers maybe enjoy working with the media? Are you a skilled editor? So really assess what skills you have to work with as a group. What relationships do you have that could be valuable or, on the flip side, potentially harmful? Does anyone have any close media relationship? Does your group have allies or opponents? Who are they and how willing are they to participate? If you have partners or allies, what are their reputations? Are they good or bad? And what's your group's reputation? So just some prompting questions to help you conduct that internal scan. The external scan is your opportunity to assess the environment for your communication efforts. Take stock of what's happening around you and incorporate important findings and observations into your strategy. So you want to ask yourself, just like we did with the internal scan, a few prompting questions. So what issues are being talked about in the community, on your island, in the media? Specifically, what's happening that could have an impact on your project? Are there active supporters or opposition for your topic or issue? Is your group, organization, or topic widely known or being discussed? If so, what are people saying? Are there misconceptions or misinformation surrounding your issue? Where are you in the political cycle? So for example, is it an election year? Is it legislative session? Is the political landscape favorable? And then what current events could affect your project, either attract positive or negative attention? So for example, is there an extreme weather event that gives you a chance to raise an issue maybe that couldn't be raised before? One of the main reasons for the external scan is to help you understand the current conversation about your topic. What are people saying about your topic or issue? What kind of media coverage is it getting? Does the current coverage align with how you want people to see your project or your work? You have the opportunity to help shape the way people perceive your topic But you really need to understand the current conversation before you can decide if it makes sense to join it or start your own. So thanks to Bolthouse Farms Baby Carrots, we have a fun example of what it looks like to start your own conversation. And this is a little bit of an older example, but I really love it, so bear with me. In 2008, a group of carrot farmers worked with an advertising agency to reframe baby carrots as less of a healthy vegetable and more of an edgy junk food. So carrots were rebranded as the original orange doodles. Eat them like junk. Their junk food advertisements were created to generate buzz. They were shooting baby carrots out of rocket launchers, and people were riding around on dinosaurs. So they had some flashy ads to get attention, flashy billboards. They also repackaged baby carrots and made them look and feel like potato chips, and even added these little flavor packets. So they really did seem like Doritos, and they put them in vending machines and put them in schools. And so they worked really hard to flip the conversation, and no longer were people talking about carrots as healthy. Now they're talking about carrots as cool. And as a result, the sale of baby carrots skyrocketed. Bit of a disclaimer, reframing, as this is called, is often an uphill battle, and it takes time and money, consensus among many organizations and spokespeople, and then patience. But I mention this because if the conversation around your topic is unfavorable and will likely keep you from reaching your goal, reframing may be worth it. Our next step, so the third step in the planning process, is to identify your target audience. Start by asking yourself, who am I trying to reach or motivate to act? Who can make my objective a reality by taking a specific action or changing a specific behavior? In other words, who has the power to give you what you want? It sounds a little crass, but at the end of the day, that is what it is about. So say, for example, you're trying to increase compliance of fishing rules within a marine reserve. The person you need to reach is likely a fisherman, fisherwoman. This is the person who decides that they're going to comply with a rule or not. But you may not want to reach out to them directly, and instead you may decide to reach them through an influential audience, such as their spouse or partner, their children, other fishers, or perhaps a restaurant owner. These are all potential influential audiences, and the main point here is that whatever group you are reaching out to or communicating with, either the decision maker or an influential audience, this is your target audience. One group that is not your target audience is the general public. If we try to target everyone, we fail to target anyone. And you simply can't find a message that resonates with everyone. And the result is watered down messages that don't reach your target audience or motivate action. When it comes to target audiences, it's helpful to be as specific as possible. The smaller the target audience, the easier it is to create focused communications that will move them to action. So once you know who your target audience is, you need to learn about them. What do they think about your topic? What do they care about? What do they value? What do they want and enjoy? So we need to remember, and it seems obvious, but it's such an important reminder, that different audiences see things differently. For example, here on the screen, a fisher likely values fish as food, where perhaps a scuba diver might value fish for aesthetics or recreation. Nothing better or worse about either point, they're just different perspectives. And this matters because people care more about an issue when it's packaged in a way that aligns with their values, concerns, and beliefs. So our job, or your job, is to show how your project is connected to the things that they already care about. And you do this to get their attention, and you do it to get their support. If your objective involves an action, and in most cases it will, and I would probably argue that it always should, then you need to consider potential barriers that may stop or delay your audience from taking action. For example, if you ask someone to properly dispose of a car battery, but the desired disposal method is inconvenient for them, maybe it's too expensive, or the facility is too far away, the schedule doesn't work with their work schedule. These are all barriers that they need to overcome. So your job is to identify potential barriers and figure out creative ways to minimize them or provide incentives that make it worth it for your audience to take the action, even if it's inconvenient to them. In order to discover who your audience is, to find out what they care about, what they understand about your topic, demographics such as their education level or age, and potential behavior barriers, you need to do some research. Many of the same methods that are on this screen can be applied to assess and understand the context surrounding your topic. And I just put a few examples, and I'm sure the folks on the phone or on the webinar and participating in this course have lots of other powerful examples of ways to learn about your audience. But a few kind of standard ones, a simple one is to review existing research, so doing a lit review. What else, what's out there? How can you learn about your audience? Looking online, using Facebook social to understand demographics. Can also just do simple Google searches to understand what media, what people are saying online about your issue. Can conduct interviews, focus groups, surveys, public opinion research. And I put up here, talk with partners, colleagues, and community contacts, because so often I feel like when we're talking about conducting research, we always are visualizing formal research, and we can learn so much through the informal research as well. And a lot of times it's really just asking your target audience questions and getting out there. If you're working in a small community or with a relatively small audience, one of the easiest ways to learn about them and about the issues surrounding your topic is to reach them directly. If you don't have a direct connection, you can solicit feedback or share your messages through someone with a more direct connection to them, such as maybe a friend of theirs, family member, acquaintance, or colleague. So I just want to stress here that it really is all about connections. If you're working in a larger community or city with a larger audience, these kinds of direct connections may not apply, and you may have to recruit the media or a well-respected messenger, which we'll talk about more in the second webinar. So I'm going to take a break from talking soon because it's almost your turn, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So for starters, we want you to log in to the Strategic Communication online course group. It's a mouthful. So you want to log into the group, find your partner, and introduce yourself. So to do this, go to reefresilience.org and click on the network tab, or go to that link displayed on the screen. If you aren't already signed up, fill out and submit the registration form. If you are, you can just log right in with your username and password. You join the Strategic Communication online course group by clicking on Groups in the sidebar menu, then clicking Join Group next to our group name. Once you're in the group, click on Partner Assignments Post. Find your partner in the Google Doc and begin communicating with your partner in that discussion feed. You can also send them a private message through the network forum or email them. How you work with your partner is up to you. If you have a question or concern about your partner having difficulty communicating with them, please reach out to us at resilience@tnc.org. And once again, we will remind you of next steps in the email. Next, we're asking you to read the first 4 web pages about strategic communication, goal and objectives, context, and audience. So you'll see a lot of the key points that I just went over. You'll dive a little deeper, then take the quizzes and complete the 3 worksheets. How you tackle this is really up to you, but we do recommend completing 1 section at a time. For example, read a section, take the quiz, complete the worksheet before you move to the next section. After completing the goal and objectives lesson and worksheet, share your goal and the 1 objective you plan to focus on for the rest of your strategy with your partner, and do so via the goal and objective posts in our discussion group. You can see right up there on the screen. You will also need to provide feedback on your partner's goal and objective before beginning the next lesson. And we've provided some guidelines and prompting questions within the post to help you provide feedback. So it's really, we're giving you this opportunity to work with a partner. It's totally up to you if you choose to do so, but some of the information that's in there will be helpful to you as well if you're working individually. For those of you who are choosing to have a partner, how you interact with your partner throughout the rest of the course is really up to you. We do recommend sharing ideas, challenges, and questions with your partner, but the only real requirement is the sharing and feedback of the goal and objective. At the end of each webinar, there will be a question and answer session. If you or your partner would like assistance or want to share with the larger group, please do so at that time. I'd now like to open up the webinar for questions. Remember that you can either send us your question via the question box or raise your hand and Sherry will call on you. So thank you, Sherry, for helping us with this, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Kristen. That was a great overview, and I hope things are starting to sink in a little bit. That was a lot of information at one time. So go ahead and think right now if you have any questions about the actual schedule, any logistics for the course, if you didn't understand something about the partners. If you have questions about the content as well, Kristen, as she said, you will get to go through in more depth. But right now, you guys are obviously interested in the topic, and you probably are working on projects already. So any kind of challenges you also want to bring up right now, you can do that. Just go ahead and type it into the question box, or you can raise your hand. So Kristen, there's a question. Can you clarify choosing one objective for our plan? Does this mean for one goal we could have 5 different plans for 5 objectives?
Yikes, yeah. So it's a great question, and it could mean that. I guess the main point when I think about planning, I feel like there's no right or wrong way to create a plan. It's really about making a plan that works for you. My advice is that you just want to avoid making a plan that's so complex, large, or long, I guess, length, that it's difficult to understand or implement. Really, just like with audiences, the more specific a plan is, the easier it is to implement it and kind of translate it into on-the-ground action. So it's really a balancing act. You got to strike that balance. So I create plans in lots of different ways. Some of them have one goal and multiple objectives and multiple strategies within them, and some of them are just a goal, objective, and strategy. And so there's a lot of flexibility. There's no right or wrong, but because we want you to be focused and not take on too much at once, we're going to have you focus on just one objective. And this should become clear when you're looking at the worksheets on the website. There are instructions, and you'll see we're going to ask you to brainstorm a number of objectives. Just like that one graphic on the screen where it was objectives, multiple leading up to a goal, we'll have you brainstorm a number of objectives and then just do a little mental prioritization and pick one for the rest of the strategy, which is why it's nice to share and get feedback with your partner as well before you get going. So I hope who's ever questioned that clarifies that. And we will have, as I already mentioned, question and answer session following our second webinar. So if there are any specific questions related to a goal and objective, we can always tackle it then.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question is, what if, basically it looks like for my job, I am supposed to focus on a communication plan for a certain audience, like a community, and it's the general public for that community.
Mm-hmm. And this, yeah, this is so common, and I don't mean that slide. I usually say a little disclaimer. I say the general public a lot too, and I really treat it as a placeholder. So if I'm not sure yet and I can't make my audience more specific than that, I'll say the general public knowing it's a placeholder. So my question to that participant would be, how is that audience identified? And I would look closer at what the goal is, or maybe what a specific objective is, and kind of challenge yourself to dig a little deeper and think about who's that key decision maker, or maybe those individuals in the group, and whittle it down even more and segment that audience further. So it sounds like you're talking about a particular community group. So already it's not the general public, it's a community group. And then can you get even, break it down even further to think about different kinds of people that make up that community group. So if we have some more specifics, I'm happy to give some more input. But I think the danger with general public is it makes it really hard to move through the planning process. It's going to be really hard to think about tailored messages and ways to reach that audience without understanding them more. And sometimes if you're thinking of a specific person and you know that person's name, write it down. Like, the more specific we can get, the better. Sherry, did that answer that question?
Yes, I haven't gotten any feedback otherwise, so thank you.
Okay, yeah, let me know. Sorry, I got a little off track.
Okay, another question. How do you overcome corruption in government in developed or developing countries as a barrier to implementing legislation or new policy?
Oh boy, I wish I knew the answer to that. I think one of the biggest things that's a big one to take on. And sometimes with barriers, there isn't a great answer in terms of there maybe isn't a solution or strategy, but recognizing the barrier and talking about it and recognizing its existence and building that into your strategy has value in of itself. I think it really depends on the context. That's so contextual, and it really depends on the goal, and thinking here maybe about influential audience and who are those key decision makers in office that need to be reached, and what are other ways to reach them. But I guess the answer here is recognizing that that's a barrier is important in of itself, and then coming up maybe with a creative strategy or solution to try and work around that barrier. But it's not an easy one, and it's so dependent on context. And you're not alone. That happens all over. So I'm sorry, I'm sure that's not a very satisfactory response. And we can dig into that deeper as well. But yeah, recognizing and incorporating that into the strategy is a good start.
Okay, if you have any other questions, go ahead and type them into the question box. I'm just going to check and see if anyone has their hand up. Doesn't look like anyone has their hand up. We have another question, Kristen. What if your project spans many countries with different cultures and contexts? What's the best way to tailor your plan, messages, and materials?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this happens a lot, and it's really nice. And I think this is where, and I do this a lot with my work too. I feel like it's nice, and we're gonna talk more about this in the next webinar when we talk about messaging and talk about some tools to use to tailor and refine messaging. But I usually start off by developing some really general key messages, and then adapting them to different audiences. So knowing that, okay, here's kind of my key messages for the general public, but how can they be adapted so that on the fly I can have them connect better with different audiences? And so a lot of times I'll do different versions of the same material to be able to, maybe in a different language or speaking that person's language based on the audience. And like I said, we'll talk about this in depth during our next webinar. So I think one of them is kind of making the more cookie cutter version, knowing that that's not going to reach everyone, and then having a plan for how to tailor it in different versions. Trying when you can still to segment those audiences. So if you're working within many countries, what are those countries, and can you have separate strategies for each of them? That's really helpful. I've done that a lot, especially when we're thinking of ways to share messages and it's so based on location. You know, maybe radio is a really popular form of communication in one place but not another, and so the more that you can break it down and think about each specific place, the more effective your strategy will be. It's a lot more work up front, but it can be a lot more effective long term.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions right now. Kristen, did you have anything that you needed more time on when you were presenting that you rushed through?
Well, we actually only have a couple of minutes, so
okay.
I will just go ahead and if you think of any other questions with more time, feel free to share it with your partner, post it on the main discussion page in the forum, or as I said already, save it for the next webinar, January 25th. Thank you guys so much for your time and attention. Really look forward to working with you this month. As a reminder, we'll be emailing a recording of the webinar as well as the next steps shortly. And we'll also be posting this information in our discussion group. So there'll be many more opportunities to ask questions. This was just a way to begin to orient you with the format for the course and the content. So thank you so much, and goodbye for now.